I was going to jump on about 5 minutes or more ago, and as happens, you get a phone call right at the same time, right?
Either that or the kids need something.
Exactly. Well, let's see who all we got. Very good, very good. Jennifer, did Dan figure out his technical issues with Sunday? Are we okay to record this one on his side?
It is already recording, so we're ready
All
when the time comes, and we'll just trim off the beginning until, you know, the real beginning.
Very good. Well, we can jump into it, and there we go. If we have folks that jump in, we'll let them in. Why don't we start this evening? I can offer a short prayer, and then maybe Jennifer, you can introduce Jacob to the group, and we'll turn it over. All right. Loving and gracious God, this evening we give you thanks for this opportunity to be together to discuss an important topic and to consider the many ways that we may need to open ourselves up to those around us who we might not have otherwise been able to do so. We thank you that your spirit, your life have led us to be ever more inclusive of each person around us and to respect each person's dignity and worth. We ask that in these moments ahead that you might continue to guide our discussion, our thoughts, and our sharing on that very topic. We ask that your spirit may guide and direct us in these moments. In your name we ask this. Amen. All right, Jennifer.
Amen. So I actually think that Jacob would give a better introduction than me, but I can share that Jacob and I first met quite a number of years ago, not very directly, but at East Ohio Conference for the United Methodist Church at Lakeside, when Jacob came to the open table service one Wednesday night, hot Wednesday night, to share his expertise and what he knows. So, and since then, I have had personally an interest in justice and equality as much as possible for LGBTQ and so on, folks. So with that in mind, Jacob and I ended up connecting with each other on Facebook, and here we are today. So Jacob, if you would take over from there and give a little bit of, your background, how you came to this spot in life, or education and so on. Thanks.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, everybody. I really appreciate it. I always enjoy having conversations about diversity and about trans folk, and so whenever I get the opportunity to, I jump on it. So my undergrad degree is in youth ministries, which I obtained from Gordon College, and I have a master's in psychology, diversity management. I'm also an adjunct professor at Case Western Reserve in their Mandel School of Applied Social Sciences, and I teach a class, which is one of the most favorite things I do. The class that I teach is called Oppression and Privilege in a Multicultural Society. And so it's interesting when my students come in for the first time and they look at me, they're like, what is this old white dude talking about diversity? What does he know? The more we delve into what diversity is and how, each of us represents diversity in many different ways, they come to realize, wow, okay, so I misjudged this guy when I first walked into the room. And that's okay, because that's what we do. Sometimes we are, because of the society that we live in, we often go to our immediate thinking. Okay, so I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint now that I have here, and we are going to see what comes up. Hopefully it will bring up the one that I want, and it didn't, so let's try again. That's okay. So can you all hear me still? Okay. So while we're waiting for the PowerPoint to come up, instead of sitting here in silence, one of the things I would love for you all to do is think about 3 really important people to you. Okay. Then I want you to think about some of your favorite places to go with them. And some of the things that you like to talk about with your friends. So let's think about those things for a few minutes while we're waiting for this to come up. And imagine, usually I do this if we're in person. This is an exercise that I do with folks. So imagine now you're going and introducing yourself to somebody, and you're starting to have a conversation. But you can't share any of that stuff that you were just thinking about. The most important people in your life, the places that you like to go with them, the things that you like to do with them, right? You can't share that. Because what if you said the wrong thing? What if somebody you work with or someone you go to church with didn't know anything about you? You know, we go into work or we go into church, and what's the first thing that people say to you when they see you? How are you? What'd you do this week? We ask those questions, but yet sometimes not everybody can answer those questions because of who they are, how they identify, what their lives are like. So we have to think in the dynamic of how can we best understand people that we don't know? And one of those things is learning and understanding about diversity and what diversity is. And so the first slide, hopefully that Jennifer will be able to pull up on here. Could you go down to the, actually go down to the third slide. Some of the stuff we're going to be talking about may trigger some folks. It may, you may not understand it. You may get a little bit upset about some of the stuff I say, but know that it's okay. It's okay to be uncomfortable. We don't like to live or work or, be in a space where we're uncomfortable. Think about trans folks, because it's one of, the guiding topic that we're going to be talking about today. Trans folks often are living in an uncomfortable space. So as I'm going through this presentation, it's okay. Your feelings are 100% okay, who you are. But listen and try and stay present. And that's one of the things. It's easy for us if we're not into this, or if something triggers us, it's really easy for us to go somewhere else in our mind. Oh, I've got to do something else. We start thinking about all the things that we have to do. So I really want to challenge you to be here with me. Okay. Okay, Jennifer. So what I was starting to talk about is, if you can go to the next slide, is diversity. And what is diversity? When we talk about diversity, often the first thing that we think about is race, right? When we think about those things, black and white. Well, we are so much more than that. We have so much more diversity that it's not just the things that we have that are different, but also the things that we have in common. And as you can see, there are so many different aspects of diversity. And the thing that we're going to really hone in on today are the internal and primary aspects of diversity, which are race and age and gender identity, sexual orientation, all of those things that tend not to change. And you're like, well, wait a second, my age changes. Yes, but you can't say, as much as we would like to, and at every birthday we say, well, I'm 25. I'm staying at 25. You know, our age will continue regardless of whether we want to stay at 25 or not, right? And then there's those external secondary diversity aspects that do change and will change. Where you live, where you go to school, if you want to go back to school, your work, all of those things have a tendency of changing, right? And we have to understand that diversity is more than just about race. It's about so many different aspects of our lives. And of course, then we go into the bigger organizational aspects of that. But I wanted to kind of talk about these things because I wanted people to understand that when we talk about diversity, when we talk about unconscious bias, when we talk about microaggressions, these are aspects of what make us who we are, and also how we interact and interconnect with people in our lives, whether it's within our church family, whether it's in our work, whether it's in our home life, in our community. There's so much diversity within even your own families, but we don't think about that. Okay, Jennifer. So, as I said, we're going to be talking about these aspects, but what does it mean with regard to the trans community? What does it mean when we talk about trans folks, other than, oh, okay, their gender identity is different? Well, there's so much more to who we are. There's such a richness to our community, but people don't often see that. Go ahead, Jennifer. So if diversity is differences and commonalities amongst us, then inclusion, and here's the big part with regard to becoming a welcoming church, is inclusion is appreciating, respecting, and valuing those differences. Because if we can't do that, what are we doing? We certainly are not being inclusive. We are certainly making that separation between us even bigger. And a lot of times, when we go into a room and we don't know very many people, or we don't know anybody, what do? We kind of scan the room and see and look to see if there's somebody that we feel safe going and talking to, right? And a lot of times it's often somebody that looks like us, because that's just the reality of it, because that's who we are as humans. We tend to gravitate to people that are like who we are, right? But I really want to challenge you about that. So if diversity is the noun and inclusion is the verb, as it says, inclusion is about our behavior. What do we do, or what do we not do that's inclusive, right? Okay, go ahead, Jennifer. So unconscious bias, and this is an important aspect of diversity because we don't often put the two together. But unconscious bias is our internal sense, that internal thinking that we often don't think about. It's one of those quick acting mechanisms in our head when we come across somebody that's different than us. We come across somebody that we may have heard something about. Of course, then their stereotypes kind of come into that as well, right? And we are influenced about these things from where we were, how we were brought up, the people in our lives, the connections that we have, the communities that we have, our cultural environment, and our personal experiences. All of these really play a huge part in our unconscious bias, right? So unconscious bias is one of those things where, so for instance, one of the things that a dear friend of mine said to me once, who is a trans man of color, he said, prior to my transition, I was just seen as a Black woman. I really wasn't paid any attention to. But he said, as soon as I transitioned and people saw me as a Black man, they would automatically cross the street, or women would clutch their purses. So they didn't know anything about him, except they had this unconscious bias because of how they thought about Black men, right? He didn't even have an opportunity to say anything to them. But simply because he was seen as a Black man, people were now afraid of him, right? So go ahead, Jennifer. Then when we talk about microaggressions, that's one of those other things that we often don't think about. And it's interesting for folks within the trans community, we actually have a lot of microaggressions that are used towards us unconsciously sometimes, most often. People are thinking they're giving us a compliment when sometimes it feels like this negative slight. And it's not always intentional. Oftentimes when people are talking to me, I know it's like, oh, okay. For instance, so I've sung in the North Coast Men's Chorus, and they know I'm transgender. And after I kind of came out, I had several of them coming up to me and going, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you're transgender. You're so much more masculine than the other guys." And I'm like, "Okay, thank you, I think." Or, "Oh, you're so handsome for a trans guy." It's like, okay. Or trans women, often are told, "Oh, you have such a beautiful woman's voice for being trans." And it's like, well, thank you for the compliment, I think. And those are things that we have to be careful about, because while they're not intentional, here's where we talk about, intent versus impact. We don't necessarily intentionally always hurt somebody when we say stuff like that, but how it's taken can be very hurtful. And again, it's not always intentional. Of course, you have those folks that will do it absolutely intentional, but most often than not, they're not. And so, but we have to be careful about how we say that. If you want to compliment me, you can absolutely tell me I'm handsome anytime, any day of the week. Not a problem there. Or that I'm good looking. Hey, I'll take it. But don't add on that, well, for a trans guy. Because it's like, okay, so yeah. And it's who doesn't like compliments, right? I mean, oh my gosh, that's the best feeling in the world, right? We just have to be very careful. And that also goes for our friends of color. Often we think we're complimenting somebody, thinking about, so another example, I was standing talking with two women of color friends of mine one time, and we were in my yard talking, and that just some woman that lived in my neighborhood was going for a walk, and she came over and she was talking, and "Oh, I just love your hair. I just love you people's hair." And she went to reach up and touch it, and my friend backed away. She's like, "Please don't touch me. Please don't touch my hair. I didn't give you permission." And the white woman was very taken aback, like, "Oh," but it's that you people, and feeling like she had the right to touch somebody when she wasn't given permission. It's like pregnant women. I'm sorry, unless a woman gives you permission to touch her belly, you don't touch her belly, pregnant or not. And we don't see those as microaggressions, but the people that are experiencing them do. And we have to be careful about that. right? Okay, go ahead, Jennifer. Does anybody have any questions yet? All right. Well, let's keep going then. So now I want to break down some terms and talk about pronouns and names and all of those things when it comes to folks within the trans community and why they're important to us. All right. Because as we know, language matters. Go ahead, Jennifer. You know, often people have seen not quite this type of picture. Most people have seen the genderbird person. I know Jennifer has spoken about that. But we really have to understand this breakdown of who we are as people, because this isn't just with regard to transgender people or folks within the gay community. Everybody has a sexual orientation. Everybody has a gender expression. Everybody has a gender identity. Of course, everybody has a sex. But most people don't see it that way. Most people, because we've just been taught everything is lumped together. We're not taught the separation and the importance of each aspect of who we are. Everybody has a sexual orientation, but it's interesting, most straight people don't talk about sexual orientation. Well, that means someone's gay. No. Sexual orientation is a definition for the type of relationship you want to be in with somebody. Whether you identify as straight, whether you identify as gay, whether you identify as a lesbian, pansexual, bisexual, that is about relationships, who you want to be with. Gender expression is how you see yourself outwardly and expressing that outwardly. Whether you wear pants, dresses, skirts, outfits, ties, scarves, earrings, the way you have your hair, all of those things are a way of expressing who we are. Most people don't think about that though, because most people pick up a shirt and go, yep, that's clean. That looks good. I'll think I'll throw it on today, right? But a lot of people within the trans community they're very meticulous about what they wear when they walk out the door, because many times we have to be cautious so that we don't get hurt. So that someone doesn't, as we used to say, many young folks in the trans community don't necessarily use this particular word or this language. I transitioned 22 years ago, so I still use it, so that we're not clocked, as they say. So meaning that somebody won't see that or notice that we're transgender. All right. Language is going to continue to change, and language is how we need to make sure that we are appropriately and carefully speaking to somebody. Now, coming down, speaking about gender identity, here's why this is really important right now when we're talking about language. Because while somebody may say that they're transgender, that does not mean that they necessarily use that term for who they are. All right. So someone's gender identity is their internal sense of who they are. All right. Whether you see yourself as male, female, non-binary, or non-gendered, that is your own identity. Everybody has a gender identity. But most people don't think about it. Most people go, oh, okay, penis man, oh, vagina girl. It's not always that easy. I see him getting a glare. I'm going to try and know it's from behind me. That didn't work. So it's important when we talk about language and how you see yourself and how I see myself, right? Okay, go ahead. So I really like this illustration because it shows how transgender people, there are, when we break it down, there are two kind of, if you want, right now, and I'm specifying right now because things have changed over even just the past 5 years with language and definitions and understanding. But I really like this because transgender people were not all lumped together, right? And definitions are different for different people. If you want to be technical, I am a binary transgender man. I identify as a man. I identify as a man. I don't wear women's clothing. I wear men's clothing. That's who I am. Now, folks that are non-binary that may be on the spectrum, some may identify as both. My friend Bobby, for instance, she'll tell you that there are sometimes that she dresses like a man because she feels more masculine, and there are days that she dresses like a woman because she feels more feminine. That doesn't mean that it's wrong. It means that's how she identifies. And it's really important in learning about who transgender people are that you understand, again, don't make assumptions about who you think somebody is. Most often than not, if they feel comfortable with you, they will share that. And if they do, thank them because it's really important. Go ahead, Jennifer. So again, sexual orientation is not gender identity. They are two very, very different things. And many times we see people lumping them together and making that mistake. Of course, because we live in a heterosexist, cisgender society. Most people, because of the lack of education about trans people, even the lack of education about intersex individuals. Now, intersex individuals, does anybody know what an intersex individual is? And Barbara, you're not allowed to answer.
Born physically with a combination of genitalia.
Yes, that's part of it. Yes, absolutely. So somebody who has either a physical anomaly, so they can be born with both a penis and a vagina. They could be born with a penis and ovaries. Someone can be born with a vagina and undescended testicles. It also could be a chromosomal anomaly. A friend of mine whom I was doing a presentation at her school one day, she's like, come here, I got to share something with you. I'm like, okay. And so she's like, I identify as female. I'm like, yeah. And she says, I was born female. I'm like, okay. And she says, but my chromosomes are male. I'm like, cool. We make this assumption about who somebody is simply by looking at them, and we can't always do that. And there are individuals who are born with no genitalia at all. Okay. So it's fascinating how God, the Creator, created us with these different anomalies that go on with people. And if we see it, that's fantastic. But if we don't talk about it, nobody knows. And when we don't talk about it, people think it's rare. And the reality of it is they're intersex individuals. Statistically, it's 1 in 1,500 people are born with some type of a intersex anomaly. That's the same number of redheads born. That's the same number of people born with sickle cell anemia and Down syndrome together. 1 in 1,500 people. So it's not all that rare. What's rare is we don't talk about it. We have to talk about it more to make it so people hear about it, so people know. Okay, go ahead. Does anybody have any questions yet? Anything burning in your brains that you're just dying to ask? Not yet? Okay. Know that I am the type of person, you can ask me anything. Truly, truly. And when I say that, I mean it. It is not, it's not just one of those things. I'm an old school educator, and I believe that if people have questions, I would rather somebody ask me than try and Google it, because you're going to get so many different answers on Google. I can tell you what my answer is and my experience and, what I know. And I would much rather do that. But okay, go ahead, Jennifer.
Hey, Jennifer, can we try something that might help for the next few slides? Can you
Sure.
go up to the power bar where it says slideshow, click there? See if slideshow gives you a chance to pick from current slide off to the left. Might
Oh,
have to double click that, see what that does for us. Nothing? No. We're the
When I
dragon.
did that, it made it my whole screen, not yours.
Ah, oh well.
So I'm not sure. I mean, I can close this sidebar, which might make it bigger. Did that?
oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Is that helpful?
Yes, wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, good.
So
Thanks for bringing that up, Greg.
yes, that's awesome. So when we talk about pronouns, now this is a big one. Pronouns and names and presentation seem to be one of the three biggest issues that society has with trans individuals. Well, the biggest thing is when somebody has known you prior to transitioning and they're like, well, I just can't get used to saying that. I can't get used to saying that pronoun. It doesn't feel right. Well, one of the things I always say is keep trying and succeed, because this is who I am. Pronouns are somewhat of a bedrock, really, of who people are, because think about it. I'm going to challenge you. If you go and watch TV tonight after we get off here, I want you to try and count how many times a pronoun is used. You'll lose count. We use pronouns all the time when we're talking about somebody, when we're talking to somebody, when we're talking in groups or whatever. We use pronouns all the time. The problem is when people use the wrong ones. One of the things that is one of the biggest problems these days are our non-binary siblings who use they, them, their, or some of the other gender neutral pronouns that are under there. It was interesting today. I saw there was this whole conversation also about using the word it as a pronoun. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, why would you ever use that? That's a horrible word. Of course, for me, it was a derogatory term, and it still can be. But they were saying it was a term that empowered them because, like, the ocean is not gendered, and the trees and everything that's created is not gendered. It is these powerful forces. And I thought, that's a really fascinating way of thinking about the word it with regard to a pronoun. I was like, okay, still wouldn't use it for me, but okay. And what we have to do is respect and value people's identity. Even if you may not like it or use it, you don't have to, but appreciate and value the individual that is using it, and try your hardest to use that pronoun. Even if you've known them before, it's not an excuse. People change their name all the time when they're getting married. We remember married people's names, but how interesting it is when we forget a pronoun. And yes, you will genuinely forget sometimes. And if you do, all you have to do is say, I'm sorry, I will try harder. I will remember next time. And if someone comes up, if you even forget, you can easily go, you know what? I forgot, what pronouns do you use? And they'll share that with you because you are trying. It really makes a huge impact. Okay, go ahead, Jennifer. So when we talk about names, we talk about our names because people ask, "Oh, what's your name?" And we give them our names. Often we know where the history of our name came from because maybe it's a familiar name. Maybe it was passed down from our parents to us because somebody else in your family had it. And it's also a strong part of our identity, whether we realize it or not, because sometimes our names are connected to our ethnicity and our community. But it's fascinating when a trans person changes their name, all of a sudden their chosen name is not valued. It's like, no, well, that's not really your name. What's your real name? No, Jacob is my real name. No, your other one. I don't have another one. That's who I am. And although I, again, personally, I'll share my, as we call it, dead name. I'll share my dead name because I don't care. I say I'm so far out of the closet, I don't even know where the closet is anymore. So it doesn't matter to me. But there are some people where it's still very raw and hard, and they won't do that. So don't ever ask them, please. So it's really important. And the article that's in here, it talks about, there was a study done with youth in schools, and it talked about how the youth that were in this study, when their names and pronouns were used properly within the school system, the student, 71% of the students, it dropped the suicide rate by 71%. 71, that's huge. That's huge. Other aspects, 69%, their depression went down by 69%. So we don't often think about a name or a pronoun, but to us, it's everything because it says you value us and you see us. When you use our name and our pronouns, you see us. I feel like I was stuck there for a second. Okay, go ahead, Jennifer. And so, as I said, we come out all the time as trans folks. We there are many times when I don't have to come out because people just see me as this old white guy. But if I step into a doctor's office, I've got to come out. If I'm trying to do a background check, I've got to come out. If I'm looking for employment, even depending on the type of employment, it asks on your application if you've ever gone by any other name. I have to come out. So it can be very hard and very difficult for folks within the trans community and within the gay community to share that sometimes because of the lack of support, and especially when we're talking about places of faith and spirituality, because of the lack of understanding and the lack of support, and sadly the way that churches have seen who we are, or I should say have not seen who we are. It's amazing to me. So if somebody comes out to you, thank them because it's really hard. It's often hard, and even for somebody like me who's been out for 20, what's it next month will be 20, let's see, 23 years. Even after 23 years, sometimes it's hard for me to share that I'm transgender during, in certain circumstances, even though I am so far out of the closet. So recognizing and appreciating, not tolerating, appreciating who people are, is a huge core of that relationship building that I talked about in the quote at the beginning. Go ahead, Jennifer. So, but when we talk about the trans community and trans people of color, like I was talking to you earlier about my friend who transitioned and is a Black man, there are huge inequities when it comes to the trans people of color community. As you can see, the trans women of color are killed at a much higher rate than white trans women, white trans people, period. Sadly, every year we have the Transgender Day of Remembrance to remember all those that have been murdered. Last year, we had almost 40 trans individuals from this country, just this country, that were murdered simply because of who they were, who they are. And it was over 428 trans individuals worldwide that we know of, a lot from Brazil, a lot from the third world countries, simply because of being transgender. That's it. And so not finding employment, not having housing sometimes, not being able to work is a real struggle. I had a young trans woman who lived with me and my wife for about 1.5 years, and she went to go visit some friends, and an older trans woman of color, she was of color, trans woman of color, and an older trans woman of color said to her, she was 20 at the time, said, well, you just got to get used to laying on your back, because that's all people are ever going to see you as good at, good for. And I'm thinking, why are we telling our youth that? Why are we telling these bright, brilliant, amazing, young trans women that that's all you're going to be ever good at is laying on your back? That's not acceptable. We have to change the inequities, the racial gap, and the gender gap. We have to change that in a huge way. Okay, go ahead. So, do we have any questions yet? Okay. Go ahead, Jennifer. So, when we talk about privilege, that's something that a lot of people they don't like to talk about privilege, because they think, well, I grew up poor, or I grew up here or there. I don't have privilege. I don't have any money. I don't have this. Okay, Jennifer, go to the next slide. Privilege is something that sometimes we have, sometimes we're given, sometimes we work hard for it. As a cisgender individual, someone whose mind and body is congruent with one another, you have more privilege. Those that are cisgender have more privilege than someone that's transgender. Okay. Go ahead, Jennifer. One of the things, there are a lot of pieces up here, but I wanted to hone in on a few privileges that you may not have even ever thought about as cisgender privilege. And, after giving someone my name, I'm not asked for my real name, like I talked about earlier. You're able to use public facilities such as gym locker rooms, store changing rooms, restrooms without stares, fears, or anxieties. A couple of weeks ago, I had a trans woman who reached out to me and told me that the gym that she went to told her that she needed to use the men's room, the men's locker area, even though she identified as a woman, because her and looking, and dressing appropriately and everything, but because her ID still had an M on it, they made her use the men's room. And I was like, no, not in Akron. There is a law that states that you should be able to use the women's locker room, but because of those things, because of the fact that her driver's license still had the M, they they could have gotten in trouble. But of course, as trans folks, we don't like to stir trouble up. So we don't often report things that should be reported. I don't have to admit aspects of my childhood when talking about myself. You know, earlier when we did that little exercise about who's important to you and the things that you did in your life, you can share those with folks. A lot of folks within the trans community can't, because then they'll be found out. You know, if I talked about, yep, I was a Girl Scout, people would look at me funny. What do you mean? You mean Boy Scout? Nope, I was a Girl Scout. I was a Brownie first, but then I was a Girl Scout. And I get these looks like, okay, you know, but I don't care. But many folks in my community can't share those things because, of course, that will out them. I was permitted to try out for school sports, attend school events, and go on overnight school field trips. And I was not forced to change seat or be alone. Right now in the state of Ohio, we're dealing with a piece of legislation that wants to make it not okay for transgender students to play sports. And it's interesting because there are already a lot of regulations set up with regard to transgender youth and adults to play sports. Heck, the Olympics had something set up years ago. There's something already set up in rules and regulations with regard to that, but that's not good enough. They think that trans kids will have some sort of, you know, superpower over cisgender kids, and it's fascinating and it's sad because now they're going after our youth. Go ahead, Jennifer. So going down, I have never been called it. Going back to the conversation about pronouns, you know, I was called an it before, and it's not, I didn't like it. That's probably why I don't like the use of the term it for a pronoun. But that's often how people have referred to trans folks. And when we are referred to that way, then we are no longer valued or important and seen as easily taken out. And that's why a lot of folks within our community don't survive, especially our trans women of color. I had someone tell me a couple of years ago that she'll be surprised if she hits 25. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so sad. But that's the reality that trans women of color live in, unfortunately. I have never feared that in the event of an emergency, first responders and or medical professionals in the ER would refuse to treat me, even if my life depended on it. Even if my life depended on it. There's some legislation in, I think it's Alabama, that is stating that if you're a doctor, you don't have to treat a transgender patient. And I was the victim of a doctor who didn't want to treat me right after, you know, it was about a year and a half after I started testosterone, and I got really sick. And I went to this OBGYN because it felt like I was having a period. Yes, I know it's funny to look at a guy with a beard and mustache talk about having a period, but this is the truth. You know, I had symptoms like I was having a period, and I went to see this OBGYN, and I walk in the office. First thing, the receptionist didn't believe me. She thought I was in the wrong office. I told them to get the doctor. They finally came out and took me back. By the time the doctor came in there, he didn't touch me, examine me. All he did was ask me what was going on. And he said, well, I'm sorry, this is a Catholic hospital. There's nothing I can do for you. And gave me straight oxy and had me leave. Well, a year later, I ended up having a total hysterectomy, and it was even harder in there because there were complications. I was the first patient in there, but there were complications. And so it took longer for the doctor to do the surgery. And by the time I got back into the recovery room, there were other patients there. This was at the women's clinic up in Cleveland. And because I was coming out of the anesthesia, I was having pain. They gave me some pain meds, but I kept having pain. And they kept giving me more morphine because I was making noise. More morphine and more morphine and more morphine because I was making noise, and it shut down my breathing. And when my wife found out, they're like, well, why did you do this? And they're like, well, we were afraid the other patients would know that he was here. It's like, okay. So they shut down my breathing because they were worried that other patients would hear another patient in pain. So medical and first responders are a big concern within the trans community. Being able to be listed on in your family member's obituary because the family is not afraid people will find out about you. I had a very good friend whose mother just died. And before she died, she said that she did not want his name in the obituary because she was afraid that her old coworkers, now she was in her 80s, her old coworkers would find out about him. And so they left both of the kids' names out of it. They just said that she left children. Now, how sad is that we have to worry about an obituary, about being found out? He's like, I don't know if she was trying to protect me from her coworkers or if she was trying to protect her coworkers from me. He says, I'm gonna think about it in the way that she was trying to protect me. I'm like, that's a good way of thinking about it. I'm able to participate fully in my culture or spiritual community. That also goes with 11. I don't have to worry that if I find a church home, that I will be told that I am welcome to attend but cannot be fully involved. That happened to me. My wife and I started getting involved with a church. I was going to start playing guitar and singing in the praise team and singing in the choir, and my wife was working in the nursery, and her aunt was going to the same church as we were, and her aunt outed me to the pastor. And all of a sudden, and we were also going to marriage counseling because he was going to marry us. We were like 3 weeks in, and I get a call from him, and he literally, I'm backing up a little bit. There we go. He literally asked me if I had a penis and proceeded to tell me that I was welcome to come, but I could not be in the praise team and that my wife could not work with the kids. They had a meeting with my wife and they told her that I was possessed and that they would help her get away from me. And I was like, I wasn't possessed last week when we met, when we, sat and talked, but okay. So needless to say, it's been many years since we were back at that church. We haven't been back, needless to say. But luckily for me, my faith is not based on where I go to church. My faith is based on who I am and my personal relationship with God. But many people within the trans community are not like that. They are looking for spiritual stability. They're looking, desperately looking. And when places of community and faith welcome them, it changes their whole lives. Now, if I was somebody else that was unstable in my faith, I would have probably walked away, like many people in my community have, and they've told me that. And the last one, this is one of my favorites, is that your validity as a man, woman, human is not based on how much surgery you've had or how well you pass as non-transgender. We should not have to, as transgender and non-binary individuals, we should not have to feel like we have to fit into society. We should be able to just exist and be like everybody else, right? Now, I can't I can't go through this and not talk about, okay, well, actually go ahead, because I think the next slide that's what I thought. Sadly, it's that you're going to see all the click add to text and all that stuff behind it, but that's all right. This is, obviously, that's me when I was younger. And one of the things when I talk about privilege, I have to talk about my own privilege and the fact that I have white male privilege simply because I transitioned. I have more privilege than all the female identified people on here. And it's only because I transitioned. But we don't like, again, going back to privilege, we don't like to talk about that because we think, well, I grew up this way. That everybody has had oppression and everybody has dealt with privilege in their life. We just don't talk about it because it makes us uncomfortable. We don't talk about the privileges we have. We'll talk about how we've been oppressed, but we don't talk about our privileges. And that's one of the things that I have to, as somebody who transitioned from a white female to a male, to obviously a male female. Oh, that's funny. I That's something that has been embedded into who I am. Because like I said, when I talk to my trans friends of color and what they've gone through and the trans women in my community, I have privilege. Even though I'm transgender, I still have that white male privilege. So my story is not all that unusual. It's like a lot of other trans folks. I knew when I was very young that I was different. It wasn't until I was 33 till I learned the terms and terminology, and that this was a real thing, and that I wasn't crazy. And it's interesting because everybody has a story. We don't often think about other people's stories. We think about ours. And my story is just as valuable as anybody else's. Maybe a little bit more interesting in some respects, but other people's stories are interesting as well. You know, I look at these pictures and I didn't like myself in any of those pictures. I loved my hair when it was long. And boy, I wish I could still do that, but alas, no good. But I didn't like myself, not because I was a bad kid or a bad person. I didn't know who I was. I didn't like what I looked like. I could not connect with that person in any way, shape, or form. When I was 33, I finally had the language. I finally was able to do something about it, and I went full force straight ahead. Nothing stopped me. My sister called at one point. I have two sisters and two living brothers, and my youngest sister called me the day before I was going to have my top surgery, which is what trans guys have when they get a total mastectomy. They call it their top surgery. I went to have mine, and she called me, and she's in tears. Don't do this. You're going against God. I love you. I don't want you to go to hell. All those kind of things. She says, I've been really praying about it, and this is what God's been telling me. And I stopped, and I was listening, and I said, I really appreciate you praying for me. Please continue to do so. I said, but, I have this peace. I said, that peace that it talks about, that peace that passes all understanding in Proverbs? I said, I have that. I can't tell you why or how. I just have that peace that this is who I am, and this is what I have to do. I never once doubted for a moment that I shouldn't transition at all. In fact, the only time I doubted was when it wasn't even a doubt as much as it was a question. And it was a question to God, because I loved God and I didn't want to hurt him. And I said, okay, God, I need to know, because obviously the word transsexual is not in the Bible. So I need your wisdom. I need your guidance. Show me, give me a sign, as we always do when we're, questioning or asking God. We're always like, show me a sign, give me something. I need something. And that day, as I was praying out loud, walking down to the mailbox, I got to the mailbox, and there was a letter from my counselor, actually the psychiatrist that diagnosed me, stating that I was transgender and that I should be seen as male and I should be able to use the men's bathroom. And it was as if God answered my prayer right then and there. And I never questioned or doubted again, ever, because I truly believe God made me exactly the way that I am and has given me the strength to get through everything that I have gotten through. I believe being transgender is a blessing for me. I lived 33 years as female, so I know how to connect with women. And I get to live the rest of my life as a man, as I always knew that I was. And so I've got this unique, wonderful perspective, blessed perspective that most people can't even imagine. And I love being transgender. Yes, there are times that I struggle, but for the most part, I love being transgender. And I love that I can share who I am and my faith with folks. Because to me, without my faith, I would not be here. I truly would not, because I was really suicidal. And my suicide, it was, I wanted to go home and be with God. That's what I wanted, because I knew God loved me. I couldn't understand why other people loved me, because I felt very unlovable, because I didn't see myself as other people saw me. Once I transitioned, I truly do. I truly love myself now. And that's something that only God could give me, because he helped me to see myself through his eyes. And yes, it took me transitioning, but everybody in life transitions to some point or another. And I'm not talking about a physical transition like transgender people do, but people that are in Christ, that have a relationship transition, because understanding who we are as children of God, we have to open our hearts up to him for him to work in our lives. And we can't do that if there are roadblocks. And to me, that was a roadblock for me. And so I had to change my life, change who I change to who I knew that I was, instead of to somebody, instead of living a life that everybody else wanted me to live. Okay, Jennifer. And I know we're getting really, I think I'm over my time. But do anybody have any questions yet so far? Okay. The last several slides are talking about how to be an ally. What does an ally look like? You know, allies help others understand the importance of equity, fairness, acceptance, and mutual respect. Being an ally is more than just saying, oh, I support you and I'm an ally. Being an ally also means, and it can be hard sometimes, because it's not just standing up and supporting somebody. Sometimes it's going against the crowd when someone is saying something derogatory about transgender folks. It means speaking up and saying, you know, that's not true. You don't know. It means calling legislators and saying, I support transgender youth. It means, you know, being that person when a trans person feels like, or has their family disown them, you know, give them that hug of support. It's that going into the restroom with a trans person because you want to make sure they're safe. It's going that little bit further, because anybody can say that they're an ally, but if they don't put their walk where their talk is, then what is your allyship worth? Sorry, Giovanni. Gio's agreeing with me. Okay, go to the next one. So, you know, being an effective ally means respecting one another, respecting the individual's identity, their respecting who they are as a person, and trying to get to know them as a person, as opposed to just them as the trans individual. Go ahead, Jennifer. Sometimes it means you don't share because they have maybe come out to you, but nobody else knows. So that means you don't share it with anybody. It's not your place. Supporting folks, as I said, avoid assumptions and stereotyping. It's really easy for us to do that. And not just with trans folks, we do it all the time. So and it's okay, like I said, to ask questions as long as they're respectful and they're not invasive. Because again, Most trans people would rather you ask than make assumptions or say something wrong, right? Okay, go ahead. An ally expects to make some mistakes. Again, I said, just say I'm sorry, and that's okay, as long as you apologize. You also have to acknowledge how homophobia and transphobia and heterosexism have operated in your lives and in our lives. The overwhelming when you watch TV. Yeah, we're seeing more gay couples or folks that are bi or whatever, but we're still seeing very few representation of trans folks in media. Most of the representation has been either from the drag community, whom I truly 100% support. Some folks in my community don't, but I absolutely support my drag community. But that's not all of who we are. We're so much more than that, and we're certainly not the Silence of the Lambs. So recognize that those have been hindrances to us, and educate yourselves. If you don't know, find somebody who is knowledgeable. Find resources that are accurate. Look at national organizations like the National Center for Transgender Equality, the Human Rights Campaign, PFLAG, GLSEN. These are some amazing organizations that do some fantastic work for folks within the community nationwide. Throughout the state of Ohio, you've got Equality Ohio, that's our statewide organization. Trans Ohio, which is our statewide trans organization. Of course, Margie's Hope is local. The LGBT Center in Cleveland is local. So Canopy, that's in Akron. Find those local organizations and people and reach out and see, make yourself aware and make sure there's resources. Go ahead. Listen and learn. So many times we think we're listening, but what we're actually doing is we're listening, but we're forming the answer. We're forming a question in our mind as we're listening sometimes. So sometimes we just need to stop and not do that. Just stop and listen and learn and know what your limits as an ally are. Many times people go to marches and supporting of trans folks, but what ends up happening is that our cis allies are out in front instead of our trans folks. And our trans folks need to be leading the way. You can walk beside me, but don't walk in front of me, because unless you're protecting me, unless there are police in front of me, how often do we think about those things? With the Black Lives Matter movement, you saw many times when the police were there, many of the white individuals would stand in front of people of color to protect them. Same with this situation. And I know you think, well, that's kind of drastic, but it happens. It happens. Go ahead. Okay, so you as the church, what can you do? Gee, you recognize that picture? If you have name tags, what do they look like? Do you have the option or do you have name tags for folks to put their pronouns on? Or do you ask them to put their pronouns on them? Because I'll tell you, that's a huge thing for a trans person to walk in and see people with their pronouns on their name tags, because it's like, oh wow, that's so cool. How are you being inclusive with your language with regard to non-binary individuals, with your sermons or with the songs that you sing? Are you saying brothers and sisters all the time, or are you incorporating your non-binary siblings by saying siblings, or hello friends instead of hey guys? We use that language all the time and we don't think about it, right, Joel? It's this, we're so used to, hey guys, how you doing? What's going on? Instead of saying, hey friends, how are you? Because that's very gendered and very sexist, but we don't think about it because it's become acceptable within our society to say that. So think about language. What's the language that you use? What resources and LGBTQ organizations are you partnering with? Not just knowing about, but partnering with. Are you at all? Think about that. Do you have any visible pamphlets or brochures that say LGBTQ plus people are welcome? You know? Okay, go ahead. Are you offering what pronouns you use to new guests? So when I introduce myself to somebody, usually I'll say, "Hi, my name is Jake. My pronouns are he, him, his." And if, people kind of look at you kind of funny, or they'll be like, "Oh, okay, so, all right." Sometimes that can really open up a great opportunity to have a conversation as to why that's important. You may never realize what an impact just saying those words has on somebody else. Are you welcoming the stranger with intentionality? This training was intentional. This is what you need to continue to do, is make intentional, conscious decisions about how you are going to continue to welcome people into your congregation. Are you inviting them to the potlucks? Are you opening things up to folks? What does your website look like? Does it include me? I looked at your website, and just observation, there's nothing on your website that mentions that LGBTQ people are welcome. Nothing. I read the whole website, and this is a great start, but I think that that's part of something that needs to be, because it says you welcome all people, and that's great. But I will tell you again, with that intentionality, when you intentionally put the language into your, what you say, into your website, into your brochure, into anything like that, that says to me, I'm welcome. I don't know, to be honest. I don't know that I would, having looked at your website, if I didn't know you, I don't know that I would feel that I would go to the church. Just being straight up, Are you being intentional about inviting trans and non-binary folks to participate in worship, and not just worship itself, but when you're able to get back together, are there, and I know that you may not have very many trans or non-binary folks right now, but once they find out about the welcoming congregation that you are, will they have that opportunity to serve communion, to read scripture, participate fully in the church like everybody else does? And that's one of the things that a lot of churches will say, "Oh, you can come, but we don't want you up front." And they don't say it to your face, but several of my friends, one of my very dear friends, she was the sound person for her old church. And when she came out, they basically told her that they didn't want her doing the sound anymore. And she had installed the sound system. So, and she's obviously very gifted. So she had to make the hard decision, and she'd been going there since her kids were young. The hard decision of, do I want to stay in a church where where what I do is not valued, or do I go to a church where they see me for all of me and not just some of me? Okay. And so, final thoughts. Yes, we're at the end. Yay. Just think about what your language is. How do you help people to become the successful person that they are? Remember that advocacy is really, really important. When I think of advocacy, does somebody have to go to the doctor's office and they're afraid? I take them, I go with them, because they're not always sure how somebody will treat them. Think about our kids, our youth, our teens, and what they're dealing with in schools, especially today. Don't be dismissive of somebody's identity or their feelings. And remember, most of all, we're all children of God. We're all children of God. He calls us, every one of us. So, and I believe that is the end. Jen, are there any questions? I know I went over, sorry about that with the complications earlier. It kind of like blew everything up. But does anybody have questions? Please, like I said, I'm one of those people that you can ask anything of me. Thank you, Jennifer, for being my finger.
I'm glad to help out. So I want to give you just a one little benefit about Harmony Springs. It seems like we might need something positive on our side from what you said about our website. We are on gaychurch.org. We are listed on that page as, you know, a group that would be, you know, open and accepting and affirming. Also, we've received messages in the past, and if someone writes to us and says, you know, so what's your stance? I think
Right.
it's important to somewhat immediately say, fully involved in all parts of the church, including leadership.
Good.
Because when you say including leadership, that really gives the clue that you were mentioning. You know, you're welcome to come to our church, and we'll pray it behind your back that you change your mind. You know?
Yep. Absolutely. Well, and it's important, you know, like whenever people are talking about going, you know, finding a job or even looking at different doctors and everything, a lot of people in the trans community, they'll go to the website, to the work website, to see what their non-discrimination policy says for the work that they want to, you know, the job that they're looking at. And if it's not inclusive, you don't want to go to a place that is going to turn around and say, nope, sorry, your kind's not welcome here, you know. And like I said, I'm just lucky and blessed that my relationship was not based on a church, but it was based on God.
I do have a question.
Okay.
How are we to be inclusive, but not to the point of pandering? Or, you know what I mean? Like
tokenism.
yes.
Yeah, I get it. Trust me. Well, and just be upfront. You know, Margie's Hope is an organization that I founded and run, and I'm very upfront with the people of color that I ask to come to the table. I say, look, I need you. I'm going to be honest. I need trans people of color because I want people to know that we are supportive of all people. And I said, but if you ever feel like I am ever using you as a token, you need to tell me immediately, because I will not stand for that, or if anybody else is. And I think there's important, you know, distinction between that, is understanding that, yes, you're welcome. We want you to come. We want people to see the diversity that our community is, because, you know, one of the things I say about the trans community often is that we are truly a microcosm of society as a whole, because we truly represent all people. And so if you look at it through that lens and you are real and honest and say, we want you, we want to make sure that people see you, but we also don't want to put you on display to the point that you feel uncomfortable. But I also think that it's important to see people on your website. If you've got a gay couple or a gay man or trans people or whatever, if they're comfortable representing, let them represent also. Let them, because a lot of times, you know, there's a difference between being tokenized and being utilized. You hear what I'm saying? If they feel like they are part of the church and that they're welcomed and that they're at home and this is where they're comfortable, let them represent, let them support, let them be there. Did that answer your question?
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much.
Sure. Any other questions?
I feel almost like we might need to have you back in a few days once we've had time to chew on all the information.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah,
lot
I
of
was
good
gonna
stuff here.
Yeah, there is. I apologize for the technical difficulties of earlier, because I think that it would have been a lot, well, it wouldn't have been shorter. It just would have been during the time frame that we needed to have it at, But yeah, it's a lot to take in. It really is. And it's work, just like working to build a supportive community. The intentionality that you put behind it is really important. And what you did tonight was the intentional work to start that process. And I appreciate it. Thank you.
I want to say thank you so much for coming tonight, Jacob, and thank you for all that information. That's really great stuff. With your permission, we'll put a copy of this on our Harmony Springs YouTube channel, and then we'll have it available for other people in leadership who are unable to make it tonight.
That sounds fantastic.
Okay. This is our applauding and saying thank you. So thank you so much for being here. We do this during church when we're cheering for things.
Good.
It's fun.
Jacob and Jennifer, would we be able to get copies of the slides that were presented tonight? Could you send those maybe by email that we could look at more closely?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Jennifer, if you could just make that into a PDF, I would appreciate it.
Of course. Yep. I'll take care of that. Thank you.
Awesome. Yep. I don't have a problem with that at all.
Thanks.
Because I know there were a lot of other, like in the privilege stuff, there was a lot of stuff to look at, but it's those things that we don't realize. Those small, everyday little things that make a huge difference within the trust. Any other?
Thanks, Jacob, for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure. Anytime. Yeah. And I'm hoping once we're back in the real world, when we're able to get together and your church is open, I would love to come and visit.
May I close out the meeting with a word of prayer? Let us pray. Dear God, thank you so much for others who are willing to share their experiences so openly and so honestly and so genuinely. And thank you for their expertise to come and teach us how to more fully include all of your children and not just those that are comfortable and easy, who look like us, who act like us, and so on. Because God, we know that all of your children need a place to be. And we hope that we can be that good example of a place that is open, affirming, welcoming. And I ask God that if there's anyone that you have in mind in the future that should come to Harmony Springs, I pray that you would prepare their hearts and show them to us in some way or another, and lead them to us, and that they would see that they are indeed welcome to come with open arms. Thank you again, God. We love you and appreciate you. In your holy name, amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jacob. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure. My pleasure. I can always talk.
When I pass out the PowerPoint, I will make sure that Jacob's information is included there. So if you have another question you'd like to pass along later on, something comes to mind, please feel free to contact him with those questions.
Yes, please do.
Very good. Thanks, everybody, for joining us tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.